So far, all the rhythmic subdivisions we've been looking at have been based on groups of two or duple type of divisions, going from whole notes to half notes to quarter notes, and then dividing quarters into eighths and sixteenths. So they're all based on subdividing by two. Well, what happens if we want to divide the pulse, the basic strong pulse of the beat, by groups of three instead of two or four? Well, we call these triplets. So instead of having quarter notes, eighth notes, sixteenth notes, we have triplets, and we can have quarter note triplets, eighth note triplets, sixteenth note triplets, and so on. So again, the basic subdivision of the pulse into three instead of divisions of two. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to show you our first example here. We're in 4/4 time, and quick little pop quiz. What key signature are we in? Think of your circle of fifths, two sharps. That's right, we're in D, D major. All right, so basically the rule with triplets is this. A triplet takes up the same amount of time that two notes of this value would normally take up. So here we have 4/4 time, we have a half note that takes up 2 beats, and then we have 3 quarter note triplets, and they're notated as triplets by this tuplet marking on top. You have this grouping on top with the number 3 in the middle indicating that it's a triplet. So normally 2 quarter notes would take up the equivalent of 2 beats in 4/4 time. So in this case, because it's a triplet, 3 quarter notes are taking up the same amount of time or duration as 2 beats or a half note. So let me play you this and show you what it sounds like, and I'm going to play it with a bar count in so you can really hear the pulse, and pay attention to how this is subdivided. These 3 beats are subdivided equally over the duration of 2 beats. 1, 2. So 1, 2, 3, da, da, 1. So it's divided equally over 2 beats. And the way we count triplets, with sixteenths, we count 1 e and a. Well, with triplets, there's no conventional phonetic syllables that are commonly agreed on to use, but I like 1 and a, 2 and a for the subdivision to count it. Here's another example of quarter note triplets. So here I have a full bar of 2 half notes and then a full bar of 6 quarter note triplets, each of these group of 3 taking up 2 beats. So that is the equivalent of a half note, and that is the equivalent of a half note. And again, the tuplet marking, which looks like a bracket, like that, and the number 3 indicates that it's a triplet. So again, I'll play it with a bar count in, so you can really feel the pulse. So quarter note triplets. Let's move on now and look at eighth note triplets. Here's our next example. And again, 4/4 time, and we have 2 quarter notes taking up the first 2 beats. And then remember the rule, a group of 3 of these notes takes up the same amount of time that 2 of them would take up. So 2 eighth notes usually takes up a quarter note. So in this case, these 3 eighth notes take up the equivalent of a quarter note of time. So 3 eighth note triplets equals 1 quarter note. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so dividing into 3. So let's listen to what that sounds like. And let's go to our next example of eighth note triplets. Here I have a whole bar of them. Let me zoom the display so we can see it properly. And here I'm mixing eighth note triplets with regular eighth notes so you can hear how they're timed and divided differently. So these are marked again for easy readability, grouped into groups of 3 that each correspond with 1 quarter note or 1 pulse of the time signature. So let's listen to what that sounds like. One and a, 2 and a, 3 and a, 4 and a, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So straight subdivisions, triplet subdivisions. Now let's look at another example here. And these are eighth note triplets with sixteenths before them. Again, the same principle. 1 e and a, 2 e and a, 3 and a, 4 and a, 1. And let's hear that. And let's move on and look at what this can look like when we have rests involved in these groupings of triplets. Because as usual, you don't need to have all 3 of the notes stated. Now in this case, we have a quarter note and an eighth note, which equals the equivalent of 3/8 notes with the triplet marking on top. So this takes up the same amount of time. We're in 4/4 time. This takes up one beat because we have the equivalent of 2/8 notes, and there's the third. So that makes up 3/8 notes for that grouping. So let's listen to what this sounds like. One and so the and is silent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So again, a long note on the first one that occupies the space of 2 of the eighth notes of the triplet, and then a note on the third triplet of the beat. Let's move on and look at another example with rests. And here we have 2 short notes with the third one being notated with an eighth note rest. So 1, 2, 3. There are 3/8 notes that make up that group. And then we have the same thing there. And then we have examples here, like we just saw previously, with one note taking up 2 of the divisions. And then here we revert back to the 1, 2 with the third one as a rest. Let's listen to what this sounds like. So we said 1 and, so now it's the that's silent. So it's 1 and, 2 and, 3, 4, 1 and, 2, 3. Let's move on to our next example now. We're going to look at 16th note triplets. So again, the same thing applies here. 3 of these take up the equivalent duration that 2 would normally take up. So 2 16ths normally equal 1 eighth note. So these 3 16th note triplets equal an eighth note in duration, and these 3 equal the second eighth note in duration. So these 6 together equal 1 quarter note, and in this case beat 3. And then beat 4 is subdivided with these other 6 16th note triplets there. So we have 1 and a 2 and a 3, and then beat 4 over there. Let's hear what this sounds like. All right, now's a good time to talk about tempo. That sounded pretty fast. I want to play it back for you slower. Now, music is measured in beats per minute. The speed at which time passes is measured in beats per minute. And that's marked over here in this software. Right now we're listening to this at 78 beats per minute. Now, if you have a tempo marking of 60 beats per minute, that would obviously be equivalent in duration to 1 second. Each beat would be equal to 1 second in time. Since a minute is divided into 60 seconds, 60 beats per minute, each beat would be equal to 1 second. So right now we're listening to this at 78 beats per minute, or BPM, as it's abbreviated. And I'm going to slow it down, and I want to play it for you at 60 beats per minute so that we can hear it a bit more slowly and hear the subdivisions a bit more clearly. So let's listen to that. So tempo slowed down to 60 beats per minute. Let's go to another example here, and I have a combination mixing all of these together. We're going to start off with quarter note, eighth notes, eighth note triplets, 16th notes, 16th note triplets. Let's listen to that. Now let's look at what happens in a different time signature. I'm going to go to 12/8. Now I want to have 3 groups of eighth notes playing together, but they're not going to be triplets in this case because eighth notes get the pulse. So all it is the natural subdivisions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So no triplets are necessary. Let me play you a bar count in, and you'll hear what that sounds like. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So this doesn't really have to do with triplets, but I just wanted to indicate to you and show you that you can have groups of 3/8 notes where the pulse is divided into 3 divisions, as it is in 12/8, without having the triplet marking when you're using this type of compound time signature. Let's go to our next example here. And here we have, again, let me zoom here so we can see it all properly. And we have here that same example, but this time played in 4/4 time, but with triplet markings. So again, here's a bar count in. So it's the same musical example, but it's played back faster because it's 60 beats per minute, but here we're fitting in more notes per pulse than we are here, and it's notated with triplets when it's divided this way. And I want to show you what a tempo marking looks like in a piece of music. Let me go into a different view here. And we often have this at top where we show the basic pulse and the value in beats per minute that the tempo will be. So in this case, in 4/4 time, a quarter note equals 60 beats per minute. And often in compound signatures, like let's say 12/8, you might see dotted quarter note equals whatever the tempo will be. So that's how tempo markings work. Now I want to end off this video and these last few videos where we've been talking about rhythm with a couple of parenthetical sort of footnotes. Now here we've been looking at these tuplet markings, these brackets with 3. We can also have tuplets of other irregular groupings of notes. We can have groups of 5 or 7 or 9 where you basically have one pulse divided into 5 equal groupings or 7 and that kind of thing. I'm not getting into that in too much detail because I want to keep this limited to the basics of music theory, but just so you know, you can have tuplets with other values. And similarly, we've been looking at subdividing notes into 8th notes, 16th notes. You can also further subdivide to 32nd notes and 64th notes, and the same principles apply. You add on an additional flag for each additional subdivision. And same thing with rests. You can have 32nd note rests and 64th note rests, and you add additional little flourishes on to the sideways 7 that we use for rests that indicate 8ths and 16ths, and subsequently 32nd and 64th notes. And similarly, the functionality of dots can also be extended. We've seen how adding a dot in front of a note extends its value by half the length. Well, you can have a double dotted note. You can have 2 dots, and then it extends it by half the value of the length and then half the value of that. So a double dotted half note would be equal to a half note, a quarter note, and an 8th note in length. But again, I want to limit the scope of these videos to the basics. Just want to give you a little heads up in case you come across these in any pieces of music you might be looking at. So stay tuned. In the next video, we're going to have some fun. We're going to put all of this basic rhythmic information to use and look at how some basic drum beats and drum grooves are put together using some of these rhythmic subdivisions. See you next time.